Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Sims. I'm speaking to you from London, and welcome to today's webinar, which is called Why Next Best Action is Not Enough, How to Create Empowering Trusted AI Systems for Pharma Field Teams. Thank you to you for being here on time. I can see a lot of people have already joined, which is absolutely fantastic news. So just a quick word about this webinar and why we chose to focus on this topic. We've had more than 800 people register for this session. And why is that? I think it's because we've obviously entered a new era. We're obviously now part of the new normal, as everybody says, but there's a new opportunity, I think, and there's been a little bit of a rush into this next best action phenomenon that is very much taking us. I got to be honest with you, I don't think that we as an industry have taken as much of a response as we might have done following the pandemic. And obviously I'm not talking about the people working on the front lines with the vaccines. They've obviously been putting some heroic efforts in. I'm actually talking about the rest of us. I feel that we are somewhat hiding behind those people on the front lines. And, you know, I hear, for example, a lot of people say COVID-19 is merely an accelerant. It's an accelerant of plans we already had. It's an accelerant of time. I think that that is a symptom of, thinking that actually we might be resorting back to our old world, or thinking that actually we're not going to really embrace the opportunity that this situation provides us with. I don't think COVID-19 is merely an accelerant unless we choose it to be. I think that we can choose to set new rules. I think we can choose to push forward. And I do believe that when we do those things, when we think more comprehensively about the business model and the approach that we can take, we need to do so with our brains engaged. And that really is sort of the motivation behind this session. It's the fact that we can pursue this new technology, but we all know what happens when new technology is embraced without any real thought. Digital transformations typically fail. It's only when you look at the people, the human angle, the fully comprehensive angles behind it, that you really make a success of these type of initiatives. So if you're an ambitious sales, marketing, commercial director, you're probably looking at doing next best action if you're not already. And indeed, you will already hopefully realize that not all systems are equal, and that's something that we're going to explore today. Fortunately, I'm not doing this alone. If you look at your screen, you'll hopefully see that I'm going to be joined with some people who are far more intelligent than I am. Let me introduce them one by one, actually. We've got Faisal in the top left. He is Vice President at BMS. He was actually brought in at BMS in July 2016 to lead the UK and Ireland Medical Organization, and is now head of the European Medical Group. Previously had a variety of senior leadership roles at Novartis and at GSK, and even at Sanofi. So he's got a lot of experience in late phase drug development, interaction with regulators, HTA bodies. And really, Faisal's role is going to be talking a little bit more from the medical angle today, because of course, everything we're talking about is relevant to medical and MSL teams as well. So Maggie, you will see to Faisal's right. She is a field vice president for sales at GSK. She joined in 2014 as an HCP project director to lead the rollout and implementation of GSK's customer engagement, transformation, and new commercial model in the UK. She's actually now moved to the US, but she's had a variety of very interesting roles: chief of marketing, chief of staff for pharma R&D, and actually has worked in the Pfizer whilst in the US as well. So really fantastic that you can join us, Maggie. Colin. Colin is somebody who I've known since I joined the industry. That was nearly 20 years ago. And he, in that time, has worked for Boehringer, for GSK, and most recently took a job as a senior director for digital strategy and capabilities at Astellas. He has built some really fantastic teams over his time, united by a strong sense of purpose, and demonstrated a true passion for simplifying and demystifying digital and technology for real business value. And I think you'll hear that echoed in what Colin says in a moment. Last but least, no, not least, is Raz. Raz is the director and CRO, Chief Revenue Officer at OKRA. And I wanted OKRA to take part in this webinar because they're obviously not the largest of players, not the most mainstream and most recognized of players, but in my opinion, they have one of the best, if not the best solution out there in terms of being a company purely dedicated to AI, but also doing so with a very human angle. And I think you'll see that in just a moment. Raz is actually leading the implementation of AI systems at OKRA and is doing a huge amount of work at very interesting different companies. And I believe that you'll be hearing a lot more from OKRA in the near future. What I want to do actually is to launch a question. I can see there's a lot of you viewing, so maybe you could start off by answering a question that you'll see appearing on your screen right now. Are you currently deploying AI with next best action functionality to better guide your field forces? So this gives us a sort of litmus test of where everybody is in the room right now. Yes, we've got a comprehensive system. Yes, however, we're not fully satisfied with our solution. In progress, we're planning or developing an implementation. Not at all, but there is desire. Not at all, and there's no desire. Or finally, NA, I don't have a field force. So I can see about half of you have voted so far. I'm going to hold this open another 3 seconds or so. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Okay, let's have a look at the results of that. Okay, so as you can probably expect, we've got a bit of a normal distribution. So in progress is where everybody is. And that's absolutely what I expected. It's probably what you expected. A mere 5% of us believe that we're on something that's working well. And 6% of us have no desire or awareness whatsoever. Hopefully that will be changed by this webinar. Okay, I'm going to ask Raz to take the microphone now and just quickly show us a few slides, which is going to set the scene for the rest of the conversation. So Raz, over to you.
Perfect, thank you, Paul. So just to kick this off, my talk for the next 10 to 12 minutes is really a non-technical kind of presentation. It's really designed to summarize kind of the many conversations that I've had with industry over the past 4 to 5 years on their journey and adoption of AI tools and specifically AI engines that are designed to support field-based teams, so including MSLs and reps. So, you know, with AI promising to direct, you know, each and every team member to the right target at the right time, it does sound like a dream come true. But when we look a little bit closer, when we go under the bonnet a little bit further into detail, we realize that actually AI systems are not created equal. We know that accuracy and quality of the intelligence are key, but also is the way that the intelligence is delivered. And given the vital role that these systems will play in managing your teams over the next, you know, 5 to 10 years even, getting this right the first time is absolutely essential. And it's essential because we want to avoid further disillusionment on how technology can actually support the people in the field, right? Because we've, as Paul said, we've already seen some of that. So before I go into the detail, I want to introduce Jane. Jane is a character that I'm going to use to try and explain some concepts. Imagine that she is a rep or an MSL in your organization, and she is actually the person that we're trying to support. So I think firstly, just to echo your point, Paul, you're absolutely right that, you know, the external environment has changed significantly. The uncertainty that the pandemic has given, the huge volume of data that's now being generated, the rapid digitization that we're still, you know, basically trying to navigate through. It's given rise to a lot of new trends, a lot of kind of technology, but next best action is one that is rapidly taking over the life science industry. So let's just imagine for a second what Jane has to deal with, right? A field-based MSL now has to contend with a computer, essentially, that has been deployed to assess and analyze this wealth of data, absorb this information, and spit out recommendations, directing her to the most intelligent single move that she can make. And that sounds smart, right? And I'm sure, you know, Jane's manager absolutely loves it. But from an employee perspective, it could be the beginning of the end, right? Especially if it's done badly. And my personal opinion is that in the vast majority of cases, it is being done badly today. So currently the majority of systems are barking out a single instruction, right? This is what you should do today, Jane. Send an email because you haven't sent one for 3 weeks, or go and see Dr. X because you haven't seen them for 3 weeks, based on rules. And worse still, a lot of them are black boxes. There's no real reasoning or evidence alongside that kind of recommendation that someone like Jane could actually use to validate where it's come from. So these human rules are largely inflexible. They're not really data-driven, but they're there to guide Jane. But it's kind of a bit of a lose-lose situation in many ways. So we know, though, from history and maybe countless examples that we've all come across, that when there is a lack of understanding or alignment between kind of authority and staff, it leads to resentment. Someone like Jane would start to distrust these recommendations. Distrust leads to poor adherence. Jane stops using the system. Finally, she probably feels a sense of injustice because she's had no real say in the tool that has been deployed to help her. So what's the solution to this problem? And that's the question I'm going to pose today. How can we deploy human-centric AI solutions that truly empower people like Jane, but longer term, not just for this next best obsession that we have? And how do we go further to use this to kind of close performance gaps between the top 20% and the rest of our field force, de-risk business from events like the pandemic, helping new starters have an impact from day one, and managing the entire life cycle of the brands, pre-launch, launch, and further on. So I'll just touch on what I call the old world, because we clearly have moved into a new world now. And I think over the last decade, and probably even longer, based on my discussions with pharma, there is a sense that field reps, MSLs, like Jane, have probably lost some level of confidence, some level of control, even power in their roles, right? And it stems from 3 key areas. I think the first one is outdated KPIs, and it's one that I want to talk about. If we're measuring Jane with outdated KPIs, given the leaps and bounds that we've made as an industry, and only the last 8 months really shows how fast we can move when we want to, yet call frequency, percentage of calls on target customers, delivery of a key message, i.e. rules-based, tends to equate success. But now we have this technology, AI, machine learning, and it can play a massive part in changing the way we look at these KPIs, because we can actually learn what is driving outcome, both for Jane and for the stakeholders, the HCPs, based on the sensitivity of their needs. We know that the job has changed, right? We know the amount of upskilling that has been required, disease knowledge, funding knowledge, pathway knowledge, etc. But when you couple that with huge volumes of data, rapid digitization, we start to see the problem. Someone like Jane has to focus or distill down from thousands of actions down to the most important actions. But traditional KPIs don't encourage that. And therefore, there is this mismatch between what smart AI solutions can bring and then the KPIs that we will use to kind of measure success. The second point I probably want to talk about is technology. I'm sure that someone like Jane is tired, actually, of the amount of technology we've thrown at her and expected her to improve in terms of her performance just by adding technology. And the problem here is that technology today has by far superseded the technology of the past. But our investments, I believe, have left us fearful of change. We would prefer, as an industry, to probably bolt on some kind of module to an existing system from an existing vendor, maybe give Jane a half-baked offering, and I say that respectfully, but rather than selecting and making the difficult decision to pick the right intelligence, so actually we increase the chances of success. And that's what has led to significant amount of disillusionment, and why team members like Jane are misaligned with actually how technology can actually help them on a day-to-day basis. And if you think about field teams today, the goal is to shorten that time to impact, right? Whether it's MSLs or reps. And we need to ensure that as a technology company, we are aligned to that goal. And someone like Jane would, as I said, needs to focus on the priority activities, regardless of whether that is face-to-face or on a virtual call. For me, that is secondary. Before that step, we must give them the information and the evidence at their fingertips to actually allow the right conversation to happen in the first place. And that leads me to my third point on data. What I want to say here is that I think, firstly, people like Jane are not data analysts and actually don't want to be. They don't want to be knee-deep in dashboards and knee-deep in data. Yes, they need to possess the skill set to kind of meet the demands of the role, and we know that, but they would rather us support them through AI by learning from the wisdom of the past to help guide future decisions and pinpointing that valuable information that will actually reduce that time to impact. And that is how we need to use data to build the trust between people like Jane and the systems that we want them to use. And it's this trust that will then actually reinforce improved data capture, improved outcomes, and ultimately we need to do this through empowerment. So what do I mean by empowerment? I've got on here that true transformation comes from change in behavior, and this is exactly something that OKRA have seen through the deployment of our own systems. But the analogy I'm going to use is one that we've probably kind of all heard of, about an individual who's hungry, right? So we can choose to feed that person for a day, right? Which is probably equivalent to giving Jane a single instruction, you know, go visit this account or go visit this KOL, regardless of if it goes against everything that she wants to do. And that's the next best action. That's the order I'm giving, no real evidence, just rules, and let's blindly follow it. But if we can teach Jane to fish, which would be the equivalent of using data to provide a suite of ongoing evidence-based recommendations and actions, that's likely to empower Jane far more to make intelligent decisions. And that is what is now possible through intelligent application of AI. And I would say that as industry leaders listening into this webinar and on the panel, and decision makers, we must demand more than a single next best action for someone like Jane. You know, a suite of recommendations that must be explained, distilling down to the most important actions that can be taken. Because for Jane to truly change her behavior out in the field, she needs that evidence to know where those insights and suggestions have come from. And I think that's what we need to be aiming for, and not just kind of AI regardless of the long-term effect. We cannot bypass human intelligence by barking what I call instructions and orders in these rule-based systems. We need to unlock Jane's intelligence and stimulate that intellectual decision-making for the long term. So coming to a close in a second, but just to move away from Jane for a moment, you know, how do we get to those insights, right? I mentioned earlier on that we have different types of AI. They are not equal. And there's systems that are being deployed today that are rule-based, right? And they are inferior. They use guidelines and parameters and rules to work within to figure out what to do next. And this seems on the outset like a scalable option, right? Rules are rules, what can go wrong? But many of these systems require huge human input. They aren't flexible, they sit within black boxes, and sometimes even include concepts such as premium algorithms versus standard algorithms. I mean, why anyone would have a suboptimal standard algorithm to help the teams is something that, you know, I can't really comprehend. So we need to get to that deep AI, that evidence, that explainability. And another analogy I'll use quickly is, it's a little bit like adding stabilizers kind of onto a child's bike to stop them falling over, right? But it's easy to understand if that was rule-based AI that, you know, someone's never going to win the Tour de France, for example, with stabilizers on their bike, because that will stop them from becoming an elite cyclist. And rule-based systems are similarly unable to become as smart as we require. We know that deep AI is more difficult to create, and these systems are more difficult to validate. But once we've done that and we've developed the ground truth from data and not rules, they will quickly supersede their counterparts for the long-term benefits that we're trying to get to. And then, as you can see here, we have kind of a diagram illustrating how we get to that empowerment through explainability. And essentially, the point here is that the best-in-class systems do this, right? Alongside your prediction engine, your suggestion engine, and the data's coming from the public domain and from the client domain, it is the explainability engine that pinpoints what is driving outcome, whether it's looking at causality, correlation, which is a complex process. We must keep it a glass box approach, turning that into humanized, digestible outputs that people like Jane can actually understand. What are the suite of actions that I can take next, and why? And that's the key difference between technology that doesn't get used and is not trusted with technology that will get used, that will get trusted, and can actually stand the test of time, because AI is here to stay. And I'll just conclude with the last slide and bring it kind of all to an end on some of the key points that I've raised around explainability and empowerment, closing the loop from then actions taken by these individuals, deep AI versus rules, the notion that rules can lead to scale and the other can't. But for true transformation, it's about behavior. And I think what I want to say at the end, I think we're all aspiring for a future where companies can feel confident that their field teams are aware of the actions they need to take ahead of time, almost like a sixth sense. And that's more important now than ever, given the pandemic, given the data generation, given digitization. And it's that sixth sense that will provide that competitive edge, but through systems that are objective, that are seen as an assistant, that are seen as bringing back control, bringing back confidence, bringing back power and consistency in terms of the recommendations. So I will stop there, and I hope that can stimulate some good discussion with both the attendees and the panelists.
Thank you so much, Raz. Really appreciate that. I thought you gave a very good account of not just what good AI can look like, but also, of course, what we should all be aspiring for as we go forward in our industry in this post-COVID environment. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and hopefully you can now see that I'm joined by some far more intelligent, I said earlier, but also beautiful more people than myself. We're gonna have a bit of a conversation now, but before we do that, and perhaps some of the panel already have a question about what Raz just said, or maybe a comment. But what I really want is to make sure that this is not a one-way conversation, everybody. I want you guys to locate the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and to use it. Perhaps you could type a quick hello in there now so that I know that you haven't fallen asleep and that you are indeed paying attention to this. And I would love to see everybody who's listening ask at least one question over the course of the next 30 to 35 minutes. So panel, you need to unmute yourselves, but would very keen to hear if you've got any instant reaction to what Raz said in his slides. Anything to comment on?
Yeah, maybe I can just jump in first, and it's great that Jane was a field medical person. Obviously talking from a biased perspective and a selfish perspective coming from medical. But I think we've all seen over the last few years an important evolution in the customer-facing model. And things are moving already into a direction where we're becoming much more nuanced in terms of during the life cycle of a medicine, what is the role of field medical, what is the role of field market access, and what is the role of field sales, based on the level of differentiation they have, the opportunity they have, first in market, second to market, third to market, and so on and so forth, primary care, secondary care. We've seen the evolving role of non-personalized marketing, non-personalized promotion, as well as non-personalized scientific engagement. We've seen the important cross-functionality between the field market access, field medical, and field sales working together. We've seen the huge amounts of information coming in. And we've seen that every time we've deployed a new technology to try and help some aspect of that, we've just been overwhelmed with information, overwhelmed with themes. I'll give you an example. Recently, we launched a natural language processing engine to bring in field insights from our field medical team. And we almost had to turn it off after a few months because it was like 20,000 themes and 20,000 insights came in. And people didn't know what to do. And some were telling the blindingly obvious, what do we do with this? And the key is a little bit into what Raz was mentioning in terms of how do we take that next step to distill those themes and insights into actionable insights, and actionable insights at the level of an individual based on what makes sense in their territory, be that field sales, field medical, field market access. But in particular for field medical, where we tend to have much smaller field teams compared to field sales, we need to make a lot more choices in terms of what we should be doing next versus field sales, because field sales are able to just to blanket cover a lot of people just because of the sheer size. But now, in the post-COVID world, and definitely during the COVID world, it's an equal playing field, because now we all, both field sales and field market access and field medical, have the same limited opportunities to interact. And we need to make the best out of each one, and every piece of information that we can get, and learning from what people have done before to tell you what to do next out of the 1,000 choices you have in front of you over the next week is really, really important. So we are from a medical organization in general, but from BMS in particular, this is something that we're really, really interested in.
Fantastic. Colin or Maggie, anything to add?
Hey there. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, and it's interesting to hear about the different technologies that Raz has explained, and I'm fully in agreement. And I think one of the questions that I've been asked a lot and that we discuss a lot at GSK is like, what is the role of the field force now in all of this? And clearly, I think based on Raz's presentation, it's certainly in my mind, the field force and sales professional remains absolutely integral in providing an exceptional customer experience. And really, I think leveraging these different technologies to execute an omni-channel cycle plan that's much more customized for customers. And I think that can play a big role in closing some of this gap that we've historically had between sales and marketing. I think that these types of technologies, in my mind, give the rep much more awareness of what might be coming through from the marketing team in other types of communications and other channels. They have much more control over what they want the customer to receive or not receive. And I think I'm really excited about the opportunity that we have. I mean, going back to your original question, is the pandemic an accelerant or not? I think that opportunity remains to be seen, but I'm certainly optimistic about both the kind of platform the pandemic has provided in some ways to be much more innovative about how we leverage technologies like NBA, and then what role that allows our reps to play in future in creating a much more holistic, customized experience for our physicians.
Well, Maggie, you've done the spectacular job there of answering about 3 of the audience questions. I'm not sure if you did that deliberately or not, but a lot of people talking about this genuinely new role of the rep. And of course, the word sales is diminishing in importance. It's actually about 3 or 4, no, it's probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I was chairing a conference and asked the audience, how many of you believe that sales is no longer the core job of the sales rep? And 96% of people actually agreed with that, which was pretty stunning. And that was 5, 6 years ago. So clearly that comprehensive role has become more important. But as Raz said, it's impossible to expect our reps to become data analysts as well. They need a companion and not a dictator, but a companion to help them guide forward. Anything from your experience, Colin, that might back that up?
Just a couple of quick things, because I think the panel have said a lot of things really well. The first one is the people that know me, which a couple of you included, know I'm a simple chap, because digital and technology is very complicated. It is. So the first one is an obvious point, which is, I think is, whatever systems and solutions we're looking to try and build, always build with your people in mind. I think, and particularly here where we're talking about the sales reps or MSLs or any customer facing representative, just make sure that they're involved in that process, because, and I don't mean pay lip service to that. I think pharma often pays lip service and says, yes, we asked a couple of reps, or we surveyed a couple, and they've helped to define and build the solution. I mean, really do that and involve them in, because certainly from my experience, by doing that, you get so much insights that helps you to define systems and solutions like this, or broaden around. And I think the second one, which actually was a question that came up, I've seen already, funny enough, from my old manager, so hi Elliot, on the call, is what I'd be interested to explore, and I haven't thought about it personally a lot myself, is what's the opportunity for AI broadly, beyond that customer facing touch point. So I think, I've got a real interest and desire to bring medical and marketing together from a digital perspective for us at Astellas. I think, like many other pharma companies, you've got to break down some of those silos to make sure you're absolutely working as one team to get to where you're going to try and get to. So with that in mind, and particularly if I then put my commercial hat back on, from a marketing perspective, there's such an opportunity right now to create 2020 ready digital marketeers how can this help? You know, whether that's through data and insight driven marketing or so forth. So I think that's an interesting area to explore.
Fantastic. Well, listen, audience, please keep the questions coming in. We will get to those and attack them specifically. But for the time being, I would like you to look at your screen once again, because I'm going to throw a couple of multiple choice questions in your general direction. First one, in general, do you feel that your field teams are empowered by the various digital implementations that have happened to date? So really talking directly to what we've been discussing over the past 10 minutes or so. As use of technology has increased, empowerment has also increased. So you've actually found that your reps have been empowered generally, or as use of technology has increased, empowerment has actually declined, gone in the other way. Of course, these are very generalist statements. You're going to have to broad brushstroke across your teams to answer that, but very interested in just sort of where the sentiment is generally. And I can see as the questions coming in, it's actually quite close at the moment. So keep those votes coming in. Second one is, if you do not have a comprehensive high performance AI guidance system for field reps, what's stopping you adopting this technology? What is the barrier right now that is stopping you getting there? So it's either lack of awareness. Hopefully this webinar will help you with that. Lack of funds or buy-in from senior management, lack of capability or bandwidth internally, lack of convenience, ease of use, inoperable with existing systems. Colin hinted about the simplicity required going forward there, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more coming up. Currently, no solution is good enough from what you've seen, or something else. And if you write something else, perhaps you could just jot down in the Q&A box what it is that is something else for you. I can read a few of those responses out. Okay. The alert half of you, 50%, have once again been on the button and have voted. The stragglers, let's get you on board. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, a flurry of votes there at the end. Thank you so much, everybody. Let's have a look at the results once again. So it's close, 65. Well, 65%. So on balance, technology has improved the empowerment of reps. So generally, we are technology positive. I would argue though that is not a good result for technology though. I mean, over a third of people saying no is, in my opinion, quite a shocking result. You know, I would expect that to be much lower rather than simply being in the losing position. So some work to do. If you don't have a comprehensive system, what's stopping you? Okay, so the winner with 27% is the lack of convenience, ease of use, or interoperability. Perhaps speaking to that complexity or simplicity, but in a close second place is the lack of awareness. So perhaps this is not as mainstream as we think, followed by something else, as I say, hopefully some answers there. Any comments from our panel on any reaction to that? And then we'll go to some audience questions after we've had a quick discussion here. Don't all shout at once now, guys.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's really interesting that 2/3 of people feel that as the use of technology has increased, empowerment has also increased. I think from my experience, the rollout and integration of novel technology in general is not great, and in particular within the pharma world, where for the field teams, be it field sales team, market access team, or medical team, it tends to be seen as a much more of an art than an actual science. And when technology has come in, it's either been coming as a guise of governance to track what people are doing and second guess what people are doing, or showing that people don't really know what to do, and this is going to tell them what to do. So my experience of empowerment has generally gone down. The way we've tried to communicate that is much more around we're now in a situation where we've got so many riches, so many things we can do, so many tools we can do, but we can't put out all the fires, we can't do everything. And how do we help to prioritize what we do? And out of that list of priorities, which we are much more likely to get traction, that's where the art comes in, and that's where your background comes in, that's where your experience comes in, to apply that as a second layer, rather than just that being the only layer. And that tends to had a lot of traction in empowering the teams, particularly the field medical team.
Thank you. I like the use of the word art. Sorry, Maggie.
Yeah, no, I am reflecting on Faisal's comments, and I think the question in general around empowerment either increasing or decreasing with utilizing this type of technology is an interesting one, because is it actual empowerment decreasing, or is it perception of empowerment decreasing? Because, and this is where I think Faisal's comments are absolutely critical, that a lot of this is in positioning and how you roll this out, right, to your reps, whether they're your sales reps or your MSLs, and how this is positioned as a core part of their job. I mean, I've seen a couple of questions in the Q&A, and there's several of them, kind of red thread in here of, well, when are the reps going to be replaced by AI, or the reps become robots? And I actually think that's possibly at the core of where you get some of these culture issues, why some reps in the field force are so eager to question the use of technology like NBA, because I wonder if, at least from my perspective, whether there's a kind of underlying fear of, am I going to be eventually replaced by this? So the challenge, or rather opportunity for us, becomes, how do we position this as a core part of an expectation of a rep or MSL's responsibility as being the kind of orchestrator and center of customer engagement. I'm curious to hear other people's thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, one person in the audience has already asked, will the field force be replaced by AI? I think the key thing here is the trust argument that we're trying to
I'll just add to the empowerment piece, actually. I think it goes back to what I was saying about the KPIs, right? So what does empowerment actually mean? How are we actually measuring that shift in empowerment, right? So if we are deploying AI systems for field sales, perhaps empowerment leads to an increase in sales. Does it lead to an increase in engagement with high opportunity, priority, and urgent kind of HCP needs? So you're meeting those needs faster, the time to impact is reduced. Or is it empowerment on a survey? Because reps are very good at saying what they need to say in terms of feedback, right? On the MSL side, are we shifting the needle in terms of clinical practice? Are we looking at future thought leaders of tomorrow through these tools that we can capture them earlier, and therefore people are empowered to go and have conversations with today we might deem them as rookies, but they're future thought leaders, right? So that for me is actually true empowerment, where we're actually shifting either more prescribing of a product, or we're identifying those individuals that will further the clinical practice in whatever therapy area that we're in. So I also think the whole definition of empowerment maybe is a little bit traditional, whereas we need to change that with AI systems now.
Yeah, I just want to add again, and I don't want everyone to go away thinking that I'm just simple, but back on that point for two other things. I think one thing in terms of, not always, but often seen where technologies like this work and would add to that 65% score, I think is and I've become a big fan over the last few years around the broad premise of Agile, and I think actually taking that time to understand the jobs that need to be done by your target internal customers, the consumers of what you're trying to build, is really important. So again, I know here we're talking about reps, MSLs, same premise would go on to internal teams, medical, marketing, and so forth. But understanding what it is they need to do in their job, what pains they're currently facing, what gains they're trying to make, all that good stuff really builds up a really good picture of how you then design the solution or system that's looking to meet that, and invariably tends to lead to something that is used. And secondly, related to that point, it's about understanding that as we all have in our day-to-day life, I'm loath to say Apple because everyone always uses Apple as the example, but I'm going to have to, because it's in my head. Whatever that is should need a relatively low or even zero amount of training. I think, again, with pharma, particularly around digital technology, we've had years of going, right, okay, we're rolling out a new thing, e-detail being a classic, we're rolling out a new e-detail. Okay, we need a 3-day training program with all our reps, train the trainer, blah, 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 just to kind of get people to use it. Whereas actually, if something's going to be effective and it will be used, it really shouldn't need much training. It should be so intuitive. They should want to use it, and it should be really easy to know how to use it. I've seen some examples of that, not directly in AI, but around that. And I think we can do the same here. So if we're really understanding the needs and wants of our internal customers, designing for them, we should be able to build something that is really easy to use.
Yeah, I personally think
just to build on that, and I mean, you know, an analogy that I give to not just the field teams, but also the head office teams, but particularly the field teams, when I see their eyes getting a little bit concerned when we're going to roll out something new, is the analogy with satellite navigation. So up until relatively recently, all we had was the A to Z, the London A to Z to get around, and you would look at it before you go out. You put it on your lap. You would try and drive as close as you could to where you wanted to go. Then you would open the map and see how close you were. And now to think back that that's what we used to do is quite crazy. Then satellite navigation came out, and that would just tell you where you are and give you general directions. But now, and that was for me the digitization of the map. That was digitizing the map. The next evolution came and gave you suggestions of different routes you could take. Now, of course, we have large amounts of real-time and social media information coming in with traffic information, which will tell you and divert you in real time to help you navigate this wide amount of data. And now if you get in a car and you turn your satellite navigation on and the social media feed is not working or the traffic is not working, and you're driving somewhere, you feel like you're driving blind. You're completely uncomfortable with that feeling. And it's something similar will happen with activities of field teams, because the amount of information that we already have, structured and unstructured, and the amount of information that is coming and that we will be forced to review will mean that using the old manual processes or pure art is something that is not really reliable. And now this two-layer approach with explainable AI, next best action, then applying the art, that is not only you become comfortable with it, you become dependent on it. And that seems to get them over there, get them off the deck.
I was going to ask Faisal, how close, and maybe this is an unfair question, do you think pharma is as an industry in kind of realizing that journey that you've just described, talking about navigation as an analogy? I mean, either from BMS's perspective or the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were on a journey, and I think we would have got there eventually. And when I say eventually, I'm talking about single-digit years to fully absorb technology that's mostly quite largely available now. I think the pandemic is going to accelerate for two reasons. One is that we see that access to healthcare professionals is now much more limited, and healthcare professionals are getting used to, for the first time for many of them ever, of not having tremendous amount of interaction either for scientific engagement or promotional market access. And so that's going to be, that reversion is going to be difficult, right? And then the second piece is, from a pharma perspective, we've seen, while no drug will ever sell itself, and I've got a few stories in, I don't think we'll have time to go through this, but where I know that no matter how good the data, no matter how transformational it is, no drug will ever sell itself. You need good, solid marketing and sales for some period of time in some way. I think head office and senior management are now seeing sales continue to evolve. And even drugs that have only relatively recently launched, sales are still going in the right direction in general. At least that's what I've seen in talking to some of my peer groups. So I think both of this will mean there's going to be a lot more stick than carrot to implement novel digital technologies for field teams as part of a complete rethinking and reimagining of what is the role of the customer-facing model in pharma. That's why I believe.
Yeah, and just to pick up on the point you made before around the satellite navigation example and how we've evolved and all the data sources we're using, that's exactly what we're trying to do in this space. You know, if you think about Salesforce, for example, you know, disease prevalence, you've got societal demographic, you've got, just take the UK, for example, different CCGs and the information, the number of male patients, female patients, then you look at sales data, then you look at historic activity. That's what we're bringing together in a fluid, dynamic way so that we're not standing still anymore. And on the medical side, you know, it's publication data, clinical trial, congress data, webinars that people are speaking at, and you know, that is always changing, and you can add social media to that, but that is the idea, to then empower people. And I can see a lot of questions about robots and and it's a very robotic way to do it. Will reps go, no, it's about empowering them to have that discussion, but reducing the time to impact, because this information is now out there, and companies like OKRA and others don't just distill those insights, but they can explain why. And it's that evidence that then builds that trust element for someone to go and do something. So I think it's a fantastic analogy. I wish I'd have thought of it myself, Faisal, but thank you for that one.
That's why he's here. That's why he's here. Guys, we're fast running out of time. I really want to come to some audience questions. I also want to launch a poll in the background, so you'll see that appear on your screens right now. It covers the complexity question that we've focused on a few times over the last few minutes. So just love to hear what the audience thinks of that. And whilst the audience is answering that question, I'm sure you can read it yourselves. Just to read out a few of these audience questions, I'd like to get to as many as possible. My good friend Ian Talmadge, hello Ian, says, I worry that once we will come to terms with AI, we will overwhelm our customers and we will see more HCPs move to limit access. I don't know, Ian. I think that we'll find more relevant visits being more prevalent as we go forward if this technology works well, in the same way that a lot of the traffic, going back to Faisal's analogy, a lot of the traffic in any city is people who are lost. And obviously, as SatNav improves, hopefully the percentage of those people actually reduces. But again, keen to hear the panel's thoughts on that. What are the common mistakes you see during deployments? That's a question specifically for Raz. There was a good question here. Thank you for the opportunity to get close to the customer and offer truly customer-centric solutions. There hasn't been any mention on how to ensure addressing the shifting expectations from the target customers and HCPs. And I think this means the message and the actual activity that we provide. Is the AI able to make recommendations on that level as well? I'm curious to know. And then also, in the panel's view, what does success in this area look like? Is it just increased sales? You know what, don't answer that one, because I've got an audience question coming up about that one. So any of the other ones, do you want to take?
Yeah, I could quickly take the deployment issues, and I think it comes back to, you know, with any technology that we deploy or we force on people, there's a change management side of it, right? And AI is no different. I think having them involved early on, i.e. your user group, getting that feedback in, there is always an element probably of customization and understanding needs. But, you know, having trial groups, let's test this out. Let's understand what works, what doesn't. And I think that buy-in from the user is absolutely essential, rather than top down. Here's a suggestion system. Here are the rules you need to follow. Here are the orders, guys. Go for it. And then there is that kind of misalignment with how this is supposed to actually help me. So I think we've done a lot of work on that. But Colin mentioned it earlier. It's got to be a tool that is easy to use, almost no training. And I think we've worked very hard on making sure that it's almost idiot-proof. Given the complexities of AI and the data that we're using, we don't want to force that on the user. It should be about that interaction, reducing that time to impact, distilling down to the priority action. So that's my view on that.
Almost looked like you were pointing at me when you said idiot-proof, right? I need to rearrange the screen a little bit. I mean, one thing I was just picking up on one of the points that was brought up is, I remember when I was still in the NHS working in the hospital, we already had started evolving from, for the majority of consultations, the physician telling the patient, this is your diagnosis, this is what I want you to do, this is what you're going to do, and so on and so forth, to the patient coming in with reams of printouts of information. And then the role of the physician was just to help go through that information with the patient. I think that new mindset, which is now quite embedded within healthcare professionals, in conjunction with the new generation of doctors which are coming out, and nurses and pharmacists who are coming out from pharmacy school, medical school, nursing school, around collaborating with the patient, having conversations with the patient rather than instructing the patient and hoping that will, you know, that'll be good enough, is also changing the way they engage with industry. And they're looking us a little bit differently from a discoverer, manufacturer, and distributor of medicines to much more, hopefully, a partner in the delivery of healthcare. And with that spirit, this, I think, using novel technology to really find areas where we can add value, where there could be misinformation, there could be different uptakes for the wrong reasons, there could be say, that something's worked somewhere else, we can add value to help optimize healthcare, that will land quite well. And I think we'll have an open door to push against.
And Faisal, I think building on your point there, and actually going back to Ian's question around, do we think that the embracing of AI will actually overwhelm customers? I think my firm belief is no, if we're utilizing it correctly to better understand customer preferences and what type of information they want to receive and how they want to receive it and through which channels. That should, in my mind, create us or position us more effectively as a partner than just a big company that wants to push information at a time and place where physicians aren't interested. And you used a word, Faisal, maybe about 10 or 15 minutes ago. You said kind of reimagining, and I love that word, because I think in this space, we have an opportunity to reimagine how do we really partner more effectively with HCPs to optimize care through the medicines that all of our different companies sell for the better of patients. And I think there's a risk that we fall into this trap of almost kind of moving from model A to model A that's digitized versus really moving from model A to model B, which is a much more effective partnership. And I'm not sure any of us are there yet, but I think we have to think bigger than we are now.
And one thing that I think ties up some of the conversations that you're both having there, that I think we haven't mentioned is, and it's a controversial thing in pharma as well, on top of empowering our reps or representatives, we should trust them. Something pharma doesn't do. They don't trust their reps, so especially commercial reps. Don't trust them not to muck up. So I think there's a really important part. And I think if I agree that if this is done right, it doesn't overcomplicate their lives at all. It does empower them, and if they can be trusted to take their information in the right way to improve their relationship with their customers and that broader set, then that's all for the good. But I'd love to see pharma, and we had a couple of examples when I was at GSK where with some different technologies we trusted them a bit more, and funnily enough they didn't mess up and they did use it more and they got more value out of it. So just had trust.
And talking of trust, I was AI and talking about robots sort of taking over. A lot of clinical specialties are now under significant threat from AI. So radiologists, traditional pathologists, etc., where now AI engines can read scans better than radiologists. They can read pathology slides better than radiologists. So already medical students are being encouraged not to go into certain areas where it makes sense to harness, because the AI engine will have read every single scan result that's ever existed in the world for that particular kind of scan, right? So why take a lottery draw? So we need to evolve with that as well, because while we're never going to replace ourselves, hopefully, not before I retire, with AI engines, etc., I think this is moving in that direction. So we may be looked at as very old-fashioned or antiquated if we walk in to HCPs with very traditional methodology or traditional ways of engaging. We may be looking antiquated and not doing it justice to the science behind the medicine that we are.
Am I antiquated? Surely not. Surely not. Thank you, Faisal. We have only got 5 minutes left. You can see that I shared the results of that latest poll. 64% of people said yes to do you believe that field teams are suffering from over complexity with multiple dashboards? So I think that really is echoed. I'm going to launch one more poll in the background again whilst we close out with a couple more audience questions. So have a look at your screen. 2 questions here. What is the outcome or KPI that you would most like to improve through sales technology or the kind of technology that we've been talking about today? Obviously, you've got a few options there. Very curious to hear your voices on that. And also we had a couple of audience questions on that. So wisdom of the crowds will hopefully answer that for us. And then the second one, what for you are the key features of a rep guidance AI system? In this one, I want you to tick up to 3. So that differs from the other question. So tick up to 3 answers for that second question, and be very interested to know what the real features that you are looking for are actually going to be. Right, so let's go back to a couple of audience questions. Really, we've only got time for each of you panelists to say a few seconds of commentary. So pick your question from what I'm about to read. Jeff Nokart, hello Jeff, says, how can we demonstrate to reps that they are empowered as the local orchestrator of the customer experience? And we may have touched on that already, but I'd like a succinct answer to that if possible. For example, Jeff says the rep directing the digital experience that follows a face-to-face call. Wendy, you asked about the empowerment and perception of empowerment. I think we've covered that one. Data integration. I feel like we've not actually mentioned the word data somehow on this webinar after 57 minutes. So I'd like to sort of see whether or not there's any tips perhaps from Raz on there, or whether there are any worries. And I think that's all we're going to have time for. So anyone want to take either of those two questions?
Yeah, since you nominated me, I'll take that one. So look, the first thing I want to say very quickly is AI is not magic, right? There are gaps. There are gaps in data. There are going to be challenges when you integrate, when you do complex feature extraction. But as long as you have the right outcome in mind, you have to start somewhere. And I think you can always get to some kind of prediction and suggestion and do blind testing and validation approach. But for me, it's that explainability, that evidence that is required, that you have to extract from that data to change behavior. We can deploy as many shiny tools as we like from vendors that we like, but if we don't change behavior of the people that we're trying to support, then quite frankly, I think it's another failed digital transformation. But that outcome that we're trying to achieve has to be well defined. But there are going to be challenges and roadblocks along the way that you're going to have to overcome. So it's very, very kind of quick answer.
Okay, does anyone from the panel want to give us a final?
Yeah, I'll go super quick, just because of my good friend Jeff's question. Simple answer for that for me in a complex world is content. It generally is, and that's a very broad statement, but I think if we're going to empower the rep, orchestrate the rep, multi-channel, that sort of good stuff, the content in its broadest sense has to be there to enable that empowerment.
Content plus, at least in my mind, traditional behavior economics. People do what they're incentivized to do. So demonstrate to the reps that what you're giving them via this technology actually has an impact in bottom line, NRX, NBRX, share change. And I think that will help as well.
We're just going to go to nudge theory. So thank you for taking that, Maggie, from me. But I suppose for me is, just like when you're doing communication, you should use the philosophy, communication is what the listener does. It's the same here. Just to build on the point around behavior, the tools that you deploy, you know they're affected by what they are doing with it and how that is changing their behaviors. And if you use that philosophy, you can't go wrong as you go to deploy and empower them.
Okay, thank you so much, guys. You can see that I've posted the results of that final poll. A clear winner: improved customer experiences, loyalty, or account management as the key outcome we're all looking for. We're looking for quality of engagement, clearly. And then very interesting on the final question, accuracy is the winner. So we like the deep AI that Raz was talking about before, but also explainability, nearly 50% of you, empowerment over 50% of you, and ease of use, almost 50% of you. Some very high results there. Self-improvement AI, obviously 43%, a significant one as well, although most AI does that naturally. Anyway, okay, so I've just looked at the metrics on this webinar. We have just as many people viewing now as we did at the beginning. That either means that you all found this engaging, or it means you all fell asleep. I'm hoping it's the former. That's why you can't always read everything into data, of course. No doubt we need some AI to help us with that too. I want to say a massive, massive thank you to you guys for contributing your time and your ideas, thoughts, and energy to this session. I think we can all agree it's been very interesting. Please do write into the Q&A box anything that you would like us to cover in the future, and do make any suggestions for us as we go forward. That would be really appreciated. I'll hold it open for a minute. And a special thank you to Razim and the team at OKRA for making sure that this webinar actually happened in the first place, and for obviously sharing those insights at the beginning. Please do reach out to us. Probably an easy way would be LinkedIn. If we're not connected to you, reach out on LinkedIn and we will continue a conversation there. And in the meantime, obviously, I wish you all best of success with this. We are counting on our industry to solve this crisis, and I hope that the technology we talked about today will take us one step to getting there. Thanks, everybody, and we'll be back with you very soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.